But we're going to go into trust now. We're going to talk about law. I've mentioned this before in the past. We talk about the Uniform Law Commission. It's actually, the proper title is the National Conference of Commissioners on Uniform State Laws. These guys were created, of course, by the American Bar Association, which, of course, was created by the American Bankers Association. And the purpose of this Uniform Commission, Law Commission, as I like to say it, just abbreviated, the purpose of the Uniform Law Commission was to do end runs around constitutions, not only the federal constitution, but the state constitutions. And this by www.law.cornell.edu, sent to us by Puddles from the chat room, Uniform Business and Financial Laws Locator. And what it shows here in this particular list are uniform business and financial laws. All right, I'm just going to give you the titles of these so that you get an idea of what's going down here. Uniform Arbitration Act, the Uniform Common Interest Ownership Act, the Uniform Trust Fund Act, the Uniform Condominium Act, the Uniform Construction Lien Act, the Uniform Consumer Credit Code, Uniform Consumer Sales Practices, the Uniform Uniform Custodial Trust Act. The idea is uniformitarianism. It's also universalism, but if you look at universal, you're going to find that in any dictionary is also one of the meanings and senses of the word Catholic, a very Catholic system. Keep it in mind, this revelation I had years ago, all right, in 2004 on June the 30th, just shortly after midnight, I switched off my radio, shortwave radio, after a day of listening and monitoring the international shortwave. And I stood up to take my nightly constitution with Dog, and before I could move more than a step away from my table, I had this profound thought. I like to think of it as a revelation. All right, it goes along this place. There is an all-out war raging between legal positivism and the natural law. That in the rise of statism, the state has arrogated unto itself all of the natural law, returned as codified, statutory, regulated privileges, licensable, taxable, and revocable. We'll talk about revocable trusts in the course of this discussion, but just think about that as we discuss the law, and think about this all-out war that is raging between legal positivism and the natural law. We might think of the natural law as the common law. The laws of nature, nature's God, is the way the founders, the settlers, the creators set up our trust here in the Declaration of Independence, the Articles of Confederation, and eventually the Constitution for the United States. But we can find out a lot about that by trying to understand each and every part and piece of that phrase. It actually came in two parts. The first line came shortly after midnight on June the 30th, and the second, on the morning of the Republican National Convention in New York City, the second part came in, and I had it all written down. Fortunately, both times I was right on top of my notepad and was able to catch it. But it took days to be able to punctuate that sentence. Very unusual. I've spent years and years now studying it out. But the Uniform Trust Code, last revised or amended in 2005. Now we're back up here on another website, law.upenn.edu. The Uniform Trust Code, drafted by who? The National Conference of Commissioners on Uniform State Laws. Who writes all these laws? Surely it's not Barbara Boxman or Henry Waxman. They might claim them. Maybe they do stay up at night. Maybe they have assistants of counsel. But who does write all this stuff that these various and sundries then go and sponsor? In other words, they put their names on it and they take it out and set it into the mill. But who writes all of this stuff? Well, a lot of it comes from this National Conference of Commissioners on Uniform State Laws, and by it approved and recommended for enactment in all the states. All the states. Key word there, not all the states, but all the states. But approved and recommended for enactment in all the states at its meeting in its 113th year in Portland, Oregon on July the 30th, August the 6th of 2004, with preparatory notes and comments. You can find these by the bailful, folks. We'll be right back. Okay, so you'll want to get your pencils and paper ready and buckle yourself in, because now I'm going to pick the pace up. All right, so we look at this uniform law that was promulgated here by the Uniform Law Commission. We notice right on the front of it, it says copyright 2005 by the National Conference of Commissioners on Uniform State Laws. You go look at your statutes. They're all copyrighted. All right, this is a private law system. It's copyrighted. You know, it's not we, the people. This is property, all right? Title rights and interest. Now, we're going to pick the pace up a little bit. We're going to go to Creative Evolution by Henri Bergson. One of these days we'll come back to this book and talk about it in greater length, give you a little bit of an intro on who he was. But I just want you to hear these words he wrote on page 176 of this volume. From the moment that the intellect, reflecting upon its own doings, perceives itself as a creator of ideas. Listen carefully. Talked about creators. This is the language of trust. From the moment that the intellect, reflecting upon its own doings, perceives itself as a creator of ideas, as a faculty of representation, in general, there is no object of which it may not wish to have the idea, even though that object be without direct relation to practical action. That is why we said there are things that the intellect alone can seek. Some things are so obscure, so abstract. You know, not everything that is profound is obscure. Not everything that is obscure is profound. But there are some things that are so abstract that only our intellect, our minds, can perceive of it. Only our intellect can seek it. Intellect alone, indeed, troubles itself about theory. And dogs aren't sitting around wondering about the theory of rabbits or squirrels. People sit around thinking about theories, you know, like gravity and stuff. And its theory would fain embrace everything, and not only inanimate matter, over which it has a natural hold, but even life and thought. Everybody's seen the sculpture. It was a Rodin, the thinker, you know, sitting there with his chin cupped in his palm. By what means, what instruments, in short, by what method it will approach these problems, we can easily guess. We've talked in the past now, remember, about Trivium and Quadrivium. Lots of these broadcasts work together. If you listen to them in a series, you'll do better for yourself. Originally, it was fashioned to the form of matter. Language itself, which has enabled it to extend its field of operations, is made to designate things, and not but things. It is only because the Word is mobile. John 1:1, in the beginning was the Word, and so on and so forth. Because it flies from one thing to another, that the intellect was sure to take it sooner or later on the wing while it was not settled in anything, and apply it to an object which is not a thing, and which, concealed till then, awaited the coming of the Word to pass from darkness to light. But the Word, by covering up this object, again converts it into a thing. So intelligence, even when it no longer operates upon its own object, follows habits it has contracted in that operation. It applies forms that are indeed those of unorganized matter. It is made for this kind of work. With this kind of work alone is it fully satisfied, and that is what intelligence expresses by saying that thus only it arrives at distinctness and clearness. It must, therefore, in order to think itself clearly and distinctly, perceive itself, again we're talking about the intellect, under the form of discontinuity, order out of chaos. Concepts, in fact, are outside each other, like objects in space. And they have the same stability as such objects on which they have been modeled. Think about that in your mind's eye. Objects floating around, drifting, parts and pieces. Here is a shoe, and here is a lace, and here is a foot, and here is a hand. And you start as a wee one to put it all together, and you start to realize that shoe goes on the foot by the lace and the hand. And things start to come together for you. Concepts, in fact, again, are outside each other, like objects in space. And they have the same stability as such objects on which they've been modeled. Taken together, they constitute an intelligible world. As we start to pull all these things together, we look at the language of law, and we take all of these objects, these concepts that are just floating around, And slowly but surely we start working them together into a model that we can then apply or understand in our own lives. All right? Taken together, they constitute an intelligible world, the world of law, that resembles the world of solids and its essential characters, but whose elements are lighter, more diaphanous, easier for the intellect to deal with than that image of concrete things. They are not, indeed, the perception itself of things, but the representation, the representation. Your lawyer represents you in court, right? Your legislators represent you in Congress. But the representation of the act by which the intellect is fixed on them. They are, therefore, not images, but symbols. We talked about this before, the logical positivists, wherein language, in the obfuscatory linguistics of the logical positivist syntactician, words become mere symbols in a language game. Symbols. And only if you possess the meta-language, the language about a language, do you understand the use of the symbolic logic in it. Let's say it again. They are therefore not images, but symbols. Our logic is the complete set of rules that must be followed in using symbols. As these symbols are derived from the consideration of solids, as the rules for combining these symbols hardly do more than express the most general relations among solids, our logic triumphs in that science which takes the solidity of borders or bodies for its object, and that is in geometry. Logic and geometry engender each other, as we shall see a little further on. It is from the natural extension of geometry, suggested by the most general and immediately perceived properties of solids, that natural logic has arisen. And from this natural logic, in its turn, has sprung scientific geometry, which extends further and further the knowledge of the external properties of solids. The trivium and the quadrivium, in print, rhetorically used. We start with grammar, and from the grammar we go to dialectic or logic, and then from the logic to the rhetoric. What is the grammar? This, one of the books that I use, Concise English Handbook, 2nd edition, 1965, just from the very beginning. When a child begins to talk, he learns not only to name things, but also to work the names of things into complicated patterns. Soon he is able to say, Susie won't give me my ball back, or Johnny says there isn't any Santa Claus. He has evidently mastered the major principles of grammar. That is, the system, a système, Auguste Comte, his system of positive polity, his system of positive philosophy, and his system of positive religion, his system, grammar, that is, the system by which words combine into larger units to convey ideas and information. And we're slayed by the tyranny of words if we don't understand grammar, etc., and usage. Here's a little bit more. This is one of the ones that I use for rhetoric, all right? Brooks and Warren, Modern Rhetoric, the shorter edition. Chapter 1, Language, Thinking, and Rhetoric. What is this course all about? Is it concerned with commas and figures of speech and particulate participial phrases? Does it have to do with outlining themes or constructing topic sentences and working to achieve unity, coherence, and emphasis? These questions obviously have to be answered with a yes, but there's a larger sense in which the proper answer has to be no. For the essential purpose of this course goes far beyond the mere technicalities of grammar. See how it's built in the Trivium? It begins with grammar, then goes to dialectic, and proceeds on to rhetoric. So again, the authors write, this course goes far beyond the mere technicalities of grammar and rhetoric. Ultimately, this course engages your deepest needs and interests, your thinking, your feelings, your relationships with other people. These last assertions will not seem too sweeping when you realize that language is an indispensable instrument in the functioning of the human mind and personality, and that rhetoric is the art of using language effectively. We slay ourselves with our own language too often. Okay? And this, again, contemporary with the prior, this was published in 1961. One last resort. The primary book that I use for Latin is The Introduction to Latin for Irving Copey, 4th edition, where we find in the introduction here, again, similar kinds of language. I'll come back, we'll talk about sextus empiricus, or what is logic, and then we're going to dive deeper and deeper into this topic of trust.